the Egbon podcast, where we have candid conversations with migrants or children of migrants who are doing very well in their careers in the hopes to inspire the next generation of dreamers. Today, we are joined by the incredible, the outstanding, Olivier Award-winning actor, filmmaker, musician, Giles Terera. Thank you, Giles, for coming.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course.
Yeah, cool.
For the two people who don't know who Giles is an incredible actor who has been performing on the West End at National Theatre and on stages across the country and across the world for the past 2+ decades. He's been in shows like Rent, The Book of Mormon, Othello, Merchant of Venice, and the list goes on and on. He won an Olivier Award for his riveting performance as Aaron Burr in Hamilton, and truly it is an honor to have you here because you're such an inspiration to myself and to so many actors out there.
Oh, thanks, man. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep, flattering him.
That's enough now.
But really, his work has been amazing, and he was a recipient of Freedom of the City of London Award, and also he is a member of the Order of the British Empire. So this is truly amazing and inspirational.
Oh, thanks, man.
So I wanted the audience to get to know who you are as a person, the human behind the art, the human behind the amazingness. And let's get started. Yeah.
Fire away whatever you want. Whatever you want to know. This is nice. It's a conversation. So
yeah, I know. So where were you born, Giles?
Hackney, in London, East London.
Your parents were...
My mum was from Barbados and my dad was from Zimbabwe. And they met here, like a lot of that generation. She'd been over here a couple of years studying to be a nurse. He was over here at university. They went on a kind of double date, like back in the day where they'd have you go on a date with your mate. Mm-hmm. So the four of them went on a date and then they kind of... got to know each other, so that's how they met. And and then we're in East London. Then they went over to Sierra Leone. He was studying and teaching, and then they had my elder sister. They had another child, and my middle sister. And then my father got ill and came back to London with my mum, and then he passed away, unfortunately. So then it was just after me and my twin sister were born. So there were four of us. And so mum was kind of on her own then with 4 kids all under the age of 5. We were like 16 weeks old. So life changed pretty quickly. But so then we moved out of London immediately. And we moved to Hertfordshire, which is just north of London, basically, like an hour north in the car, 27 miles. And so that's where I grew up. So I was born in London, born in Hackney, but I grew up in Stevenage in Hertfordshire.
Oh, wow, that must have been incredible. What was your experience like growing up?
From which perspective? It's like on one level, it was like Stevenage is a really interesting place because it's this first new town built after the war. So they decided to build this place where all of the people who lived in East London that got bombed out during the war, they sort of re-looked at that whole side of London. So they kind of built this new town, which was part of the effort to counter that, to rebuild after the war. So Londoners could go and you could have a back garden and a front garden and a house, and there was parks and schools that were good enough. And it was a really great idea. And the plan was that you could have, it's famous for these like cycle paths that go all around the town basically, so that you could ride on a bike the whole way around, or kids could walk anywhere and not have to necessarily cross a big main busy street. So it's this kind of very community, family oriented idea. These little parishes where you'd have a little parade of shops, and then there'd be the pub and then the church and a park and a school, and very, very, very family. So in that sense, it was really, really cool to grow up because it was perfect for kids and family. But I mean, again, it was it was England in the mid to late 70s. When I moved there, I remember it really in the 80s. But so there, of course, there was difficult stuff. And also, I had 3 siblings, so there was always a gang of us. Yeah. So we always had lots of people to play with. There were kids, So in that sense, it was cool. I didn't do great at school. I was all right at school. I was, clever, but I was more interested in probably like lots of people you've spoken to, lots of people you know. I was more interested in other stuff.
Right.
Like school is kind of,
I know, and kind of restrictive in many ways. You're sitting down all day and Some of us are just so into like things, and we want to do things and see things.
And if you've got an imagination, and if you're curious, you mentioned being curious before. It's like if you're curious about stuff, then school. So school, I was a little bit like, but I wasn't bad. I was good because like you couldn't mess around. You know, my mum wouldn't have that.
I can imagine.
No. But you know, it was. I also kind of had a feeling that if I could get through school, and there was maybe something else. So yeah, it was cool, you know. And
what were your influences growing up that kind of brought you towards the music or the arts? Was it at home? Was there a lot of music playing at home? Was it?
Yeah, my mum played music all the time. So she was a nurse by trade. So she had 4 kids. She didn't remarry, so she just worked all the time. I mean, that's the case for, most people who are single parents. So we never went on holiday. To me, that was this weird thing, the fact that like people went on holiday a couple of times a year. It's like my mum just got up, went to work, came home, got up, went to work.
That's a superwoman right there.
Oh yeah. Big time with 4 of us as well. So, but she loved music. So there was music, the radio was on all the time. So there was always be music playing, always, as she was like doing the housework or plaiting my sister's hair or doing the ironing or doing the gardening. There's always music going. And she quite liked, a lot of different kinds of music. But probably like you, it was kind of, when you're a kid, it's just what you don't really know what you have or what you don't have. It's just life or whatever. Yeah. So now I can look back and go, actually, it was a continual, every waking moment there was music somewhere in the house. And I think that's from her sensibility of just liking music, and therefore, even though I never saw that play out, she never played anything, or she wasn't, that was not an option. But I can now look back and go, oh, in another world,
yeah, she could have been
something else, or at least she would have been able to express all of that stuff. But in the first instance, I just remember it being like a very musical house, and she liked to sing, like all our mums. She's singing while she's doing whatever, just singing all the time. Or if like songs of praise or whatever is on the television on a Sunday evening, she'd be singing with the hymns. So she sang a lot. So that's really my main inspiration. But then I would say for everything, because she was the only person really that we had. I mean, I had aunties and uncles, and we had really good neighbours and stuff, but it was just us, the 5 of us. So at the time I didn't really realise it, but now I can look back and go, actually, she was really musically sensitive, right? Very funny as well. She had an amazing sense of humour, and she was a brilliant storyteller. Like, she was an amazing storyteller. She would have these, she would always have very vivid dreams. And so you'd come down for breakfast or whatever, she's out, listen, I had this dream last night. And she would tell you what the thing was, and it was like a movie. You could see it, like, and I'm a tiny kid, and you could hear it and you could see it. I always say, like, you could smell the flowers, like when she described it. She was a brilliant storyteller, and I'd love it. And then my sisters would be like, so we'd come down, and my mum would be like, I had this really vivid dream last night, and my sister would be like, oh God, okay, whatever. And I'd be like, what happened? And then what happened? Then what happened? It was amazing. So that I can, again, look back and kind of go, well, that's kind of where a lot of my stuff kind of came from. Those things, brilliant storyteller, really funny, and a great musical sensitivity and sensibility. And yeah, so I'm not sure about my father, though.
Yeah,
I didn't know him.
Yeah, what were the I would say, like, the smell in the house growing up? What were the?
I mean, chicken, food. Oh my gosh, I mean, like, we didn't have any money, so it was it was quite a limited repertoire what you'd have, but
But I'm pretty sure she brought some of her culture, some of her cultural heritage in. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of that in the house.
Yeah. Oh, of course. She was the 7th of 8 children. So we would say, Mum would cook some great chicken, or she would do some great stew, or there was a couple of really specific or common Bayesian dishes that she didn't cook, which we hate because we didn't like them.
Okay.
But for the most part, she would do great stew, she'd do great chicken, she would, all of that stuff. And some of the sweet things that you have with it, she would cook. And I'd be like, please cook that. And she would be like, well, I've, you'd compliment her on it. And she'd say, well, I wasn't always that good. Like, have you ever come across that? It's like, because she was the 7th of 8. She had the 5 girls. They lived with a grandmother as well, and then my grandmother. So they were, and she had older brothers. My mum was the baby. She didn't have to cook.
Right.
So she's like, when I left Barbados, I didn't have to cook. Everyone cooked. Gran cooked. Her grandmother cooked. Her older sisters cooked. So she said I had to learn to do it. She's like, when your dad and I were first married, like, you know, I used to burn the rice, and I used to and you have to learn. So she's like, now you think it's great. But then she would also say, which all blew my mind, she was like, if you think this is good, like when you taste Gran's cooking, she's like, that's what it tastes like. Yeah. She's like, I can't do it like Gran could do it. And then the first time my Gran came over and she cooked some stuff, I was like, no, I don't like that.
It's like your mom's, yeah.
So it's interesting how you're like, what you grew up with is what you're used to. But my mum would be, no, that's the real thing. Wait till you taste Gran's sweetbread or some of those things that she'd make. And because my Gran was in Barbados she cooked. She would just cook stuff and then with the other women walk into town and sell it to the people. So she was known for that, and people would come from all over the island just to kind of have some of that. So my mum had that.
Did you get to travel back to Barbados a few times to kind of experience?
Yeah, late though. Everyone else went back way before me. I didn't go until my mid-20s, a few years after I started working. And that was the first place I wanted to go because I'd always heard about it and grown up. And then my grandmother, who lived to be 101, she was incredible. They were still at the house that my mum and all my aunties and uncles were born in and grew up in. My grandma was still there. So I sort of heard about this place. So I wanted to go there, and I went there. And then once I went, I'd go every year, every spring, really. Yeah, it was cool. You know, it was. It's nice to have that kind of connection.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it fills you with a sense of, even though it's not, because I find as a migrant or as a child of a migrant, you're almost between two cultures. Mm-hmm. You know, so in a way, when you get to go back, it kind of fills you with something that feels very home-like.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very soothing and calming. I mean, that's the way I experience it.
Yeah, because there's always like a kind of question mark about you and what you are and the things that you do and that you're not even really aware. So, for instance, my mum would say, we'd be eating when I was a kid, and she would say her grandmother, my great grandmother, she'd say your great grandmother used to eat exactly the same as you, which is like she would like eat in a circle around the plate and then get into the middle. She was like, my grandmother used to eat exactly like that. Now, I'd never met my great grandmother, so I wouldn't know that. And yet that's something which is a complete link there on some level. It was a very definite link on some, it's not just the kind of physical features that we inherit. But when you don't, so there's something about filling in those question marks about where you come from. Every part of us is made up of something from someone. Yeah. And, multiple strands as you go further and further back on both sides of your parents and stuff. And, there's something really fascinating about being able to answer some of those questions. Weirdly, I felt it more when I went to Africa.
Oh, yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah. That's when I mean, of course, because I think anyone, whenever they go to Africa, especially if you're from the diaspora and you're originally from there, that feeling of when you first get there. I remember stepping off the plane, we flew down to Zambia, and I had to wait in Zambia for 9 hours, and then flew another hour or so down to Zim. And I remember getting off, walking down the steps of the plane in Zambia and sipping onto the tarmac, and the feeling was just, and I was about 13 at the time. And it's that's probably the most indescribable feeling that I've ever had. There's no way I could even come close to describing what that feeling is. But massively powerful and like a total experience. And that was much stronger than when I went to Barbados. But in a way, that sort of makes sense in a way, but if you sort of really want to sort of unpack that. But, well, my father's from there and sort of my mother is from there, but via Barbados. Right. Do you know what I mean? So the kind of, What
would you say are 2-3 vivid memories that you have of being in Africa, or something, or 2-3 things? That first moment when I got off the plane, I just had an overwhelming sense of the scale of this thing that I was now on, which is kind of weird because as a human being, you can only see as far as you can see, whether you're here in Zambia or wherever you are. Yeah.
But at the same time, there was a feeling of like, whoa, like this is the scale of it. That's the only thing I can really say. That's part of that whole weird feeling that was there. And then a few days later or whenever, when it rained for the first time, and I was like, wow, this rain was like, the raindrops were like, poof, poof, and the sound and the clouds that they were coming from, everything was just bigger. And richer and denser and heavier and more, and it was sweet as well to be out there.
Yeah, you do feel like you're part of something way bigger than yourself. Charlie Wilson said he remembers being in South Africa and working towards Black Panther and other things. And he said it was amazing for him to see, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm probably not going to say it exactly, the vastness and how freeing everything was and how freeing the people were. And for him to imagine now putting those people on a boat, and how restrictive that could have been. And then telling them that you can only do this, you can only be,
right.
That must have been such a shock, because then you do feel it when you go there and you realize how vast everything is.
And just, and everything. The rain, especially because something as kind of everyday or commonplace, you don't really even think about it when it rains. You're sort of not really thinking about it, especially as a kid. It just means, you can't go outside and play or whatever. So you're not even really thinking about it. And yet it made me look at even that differently. And so everything is kind of just 10, 50, 100 times more rich or deep or bright or vibrant or alive. Or it was really, it was a... And then in a way, it was quite an overwhelming situation because I was only 13 and my father had left. He was really smart, so he was like put up a year. And then he came here to study, and then they went to Sierra Leone, and then he died, so he never went back to Zim. So for the family, it was my grandmother, my father's mother was there. And my father was the eldest, and my mum was the penultimate of 8. My father was the eldest of 11. And lots of my father's younger siblings remember him, but from their childhood,
Right.
Whereas meeting my grandmother was a very, and so I'm 13 and he left Zim when he was in his late teens, so not that big a difference. So for her it was an overwhelming experience, and I kind of felt that, but
you get to hear stories as well.
And what was beautiful about it is that we stayed with my uncle who lived in Harare, and in a beautiful nice house, and big garden and tennis courts, and we played and stuff. And my grandmother, my father's mother, came to stay with us. We were there for like 6 weeks, and she lived way out somewhere, and she didn't speak any English. We didn't speak any Shona. By the end of the first morning, we sort of got there. We'd been traveling all day, exhausted, jet lag, whatever. So we got up next morning, and she would make us breakfast. But within about half an hour, me and her were just sort of chatting and talking. Me in English, her in Shona, and we understood each other. To begin with, we didn't, and then we found some way where we'd be laughing, and and you can just, and that really kind of made an impression on me. There's something obviously much more universal than the language that we kind of come up with.
Well, they say 80 or 90% of communication is nonverbal.
Right. So that was cool because we would just be chatting away to each other every morning. I'd get up first, and then she'd be up. People get up like when the sun gets up or whatever, and we'd be chatting away, and she'd be laughing, and then I'd be chatting away and laughing, and we were, it was, I treasure that.
Yeah, and it must have been so, even for her, I think, seeing her grandson and seeing so much of him in you, it must have been so beautiful.
Yeah,
it's great. So then how did Giles get into theater or music?
Giles was always the class clown. Like probably you were, right?
Yes.
Right, like we all are. Can make people laugh. It's funny. Is always doing silly voices and acting up and stuff. And maybe the teachers are kind of going, just calm down a bit.
Yes.
And, concentrate a bit more. But so I was always doing that. But no one in my family was in the arts. No one was an actor. That was just not anything that I was remotely even aware of. My mum took us to the cinema when she could. On the very rare day off, we'd go up and see a movie on a Saturday afternoon or something. And then she would also take us to the pantomime at Christmas. And that's it. You know, it definitely wasn't something I thought about as a career at all. Until I left school. I wanted to be in bands to begin with. I was in bands. So I got into music first. And I wanted to write songs, and I played the guitar. And that's the other thing, is that my mum, she always wanted to play the piano. She's penultimate. She was the 7th of 8 in Barbados in the 40s and 50s or whatever, 50s. She ain't getting no piano lessons. Right. There's no piano. When I showed a bit of an interest in that, she really kind of like, you know, I'm sure you've had your version of that as well, and certainly, you know, getting back to like immigrants, it's like immigrants will often want for that first generation what they didn't have. Yes. That's why they're, you know, that's why they're moving. That's why you want those opportunities for your children. And so she, like, you know, she looked in the local paper, and some old person had died, unfortunately, or whatever, and there was a piano being got rid of, and we had a piano in the house.
Oh, wow.
So, and I was the only person that I knew in my childhood who had a piano in the house. No one had a piano in the house. We got this piano, and it was a beat up old upright piano, but there it was. And she was like, okay, we'll play it. There's a piano, play it. And so then she would, I was like, well, how? And so she was like, well, I'll hum the tune, and then you can pick out the notes.
Oh, wow.
And that's what she did. She taught my first tune that way. And I would just pick out the notes, and I was like, okay, yeah. And that was as much as, you know, she sent me into piano lessons for a while she could afford them. So she always encouraged us to do, and she certainly encouraged me to but again, she had no frame of reference of like, how do you become an actor or a performer? A couple of the teachers at school would say, oh, he's good, get him to be in the school play or to read something out in assembly or whatever. But that's as far as we knew. So it was only then when I left school, like I say, I wanted to be in bands and wanted to write music.
What did you have any bands that you wanted to be like, or any?
I liked quite a lot of stuff, but the band I was in, the first person I was into was I loved Stevie Wonder and I loved Jimi Hendrix. So via that, like all of that generation is really cool, because their influences, and then you get into their influences. So you like Jimi Hendrix, so then you find out about the blues. Right. You find out about Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Robert Johnson, and then you find out, oh, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles are also like those guys, and it sort of becomes this, you connect the dots up to all these things. So you end up getting more and more and more and more influences and people that you like music. It's great. Really cool about the kind of late 60s that they all drew on like jazz and blues and gospel and country music and stuff, and it's all kind of the same thing. I wanted to be like, you know, Stevie Wonder or Jimi Hendrix. And then Lenny Kravitz was like a big thing at the time, so he was like kind of that world as well. So you know, I went to see him a bunch of times. So we did loads of covers and blues stuff and rock and roll stuff. And we were pretty good. We played around, we came down to London, and we'd do clubs and we'd play Camden or wherever. But then I left school. I didn't do great because I was like a lot of us, I'd just much rather be just thinking about music, or just like looking out the window and just being amazed by the trees.
Sure, the small thing.
Right. Just being curious about the world. Yeah. You kind of go, okay, wow, what's this? And I wasn't great at whichever sort of left brain, right brain. I've got the one which is, you know, the not academic. So I was just concentrating on other stuff. I could have been all right. I was not stupid. Certainly, but I was just interested in other things.
Yeah. I mean, they're different forms of intelligence anyways, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I kind of then just did badly at school, or not as well as, and of course then because my dad did really well, he was an academic, so my mum was a little bit like hoping that some of that would come out. No. Well, I'm a smart guy, but I'm just not intelligent in that way. So then I started to go to like amateur dramatics company in town, which some school friends had gone to, and they were like the year above me, and they had left school already, and they'd gone to do like a performing arts course at the local college, performing arts college. And so when I did pretty badly, my mum was like, okay, well, you need to go back to school and resit those exams. And then my other friends were like, I'll come and do our course. The year below us had just started. So I did one day of school where I went back, and it was that, you know, that big like holiday where you do your exams, so you finish early when you do your exams, and then there's this massive holiday, you finish like in May or whatever, and this was now September, and in that whole period I I was like, school is not where I want to be right now. I'm not going back to school. So I walked out and I left, and I went to, I made a call, and they said, okay, well, come and, the college said, come and meet. We've already started the year, but come and, so I went and talked to them, and they said, yep, come and start the course. So I did that. That was a 2-year course. And then, because my friends were in the year above, when I finished, it was a 2-year course. They were then going down to London to go to drama school.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, drama school, and you train, and right, okay. I had no frame of reference for that. But then once I understood that was the path, that you train to be an actor, and then you do what the people who I admired on the screen were doing. Okay, right, there's that connection. Then I was like, okay, that's what I have been doing all the time.
Right.
I've always been making up stories. I've always been trying to. I remember one time we were at the dinner table, and I was really young, and we were eating dinner, and there was like it would have been like mashed potatoes, right? And I remember saying, oh, so I'm probably, I don't know, 7 or 8. I remember saying, oh, this mashed potato looks like, I can't remember what it was. It was like, let's say, a whale. Right, I'm eating whale, and my sisters were like howling with laughter, which they usually did. Right. At anything I said, and my mum, like I mean, my mum could be quite stern anyway, but in a very kind of parental way. Whereas this, it was almost like personal. She was like, if he thinks that looks like a whale, then it does. Why are you laughing at him? She really laid into them in a very different way. It wasn't like, she was like, stop picking on him, basically. Yeah. And I'll never forget that, because it was almost like a permission.
Yeah, she validated. Yeah.
Of going, you've got an imagination. That's fine. That's good.
Yeah.
And also, what I value about that was I've seen so many or enough times in my adult life where a similar situation has happened, where you're at that really important age. If someone says to you, oh, you can't sing, or oh, you're not funny, or you're never going to make it.
And you believe it.
You can see, and I've seen young people close down because of that. And I think that young person is never, ever going to open their mouth again for the rest of their life. And we all know as adults, people who go, oh, I can't sing. Oh, I wish I could sing. Oh, I can't do anything. And that's usually because someone has told them, when they're 8 years old, 10 years old, you can't sing. You're not good looking. You're not, you're never going to amount to anything.
Yeah.
So I really, and I've seen that happen. Absolutely makes my blood boil when that happens, because the damage that is done potentially in those moments is like lasts a lifetime. Yeah. So, and again, I kind of value that my mum was like, no. You keep dreaming and you keep imagining, because
that's beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
What were your earlier actors? You said you had people that you watched in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, who were
Denzel?
Denzel. Everybody's Denzel.
Denzel. He was like a soldier story. It was coming. I mean, he was doing all those things in the Spike Lee movie. Like, I remember seeing it was Denzel, and I liked. Dustin Hoffman was doing some really cool things at that point. So those are the two where I was like, okay, that's what an actor is. We didn't go to theatre. I had no idea about theatre in London or the West End or anything, National Theatre, anything about that, or theatre actors. But yeah, Denzel was like...
He's such a force of nature, and it's incredible, his presence. I mean, you have an incredible stage presence as well, but he has an incredible film presence. It's just fantastic.
Interesting, I saw an interview the other day where someone is doing the rounds at the moment, and the interviewer was saying to him, oh, what's it like being a film actor in this environment? He kind of really shuts him down. He's like, I learned how to act on the stage. I'm a stage actor who does film. But who are your people that you...
Denzel for sure. I would say Anthony Hopkins as well.
Yeah.
Because he does everything, and he has that presence. For me, there's always something about someone's presence.
Yeah.
Like, even without saying a word, you can kind of read and see everything. So those two for sure. And Jaimon Husu as well. From Ladam, and just because he's from a part of the world that I was from as well. It was such a beautiful, like, just someone to look up to say, oh, that's possible.
Yeah.
But Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sidney Poitier.
Yeah, of course. All roads lead back to Sydney. Because he's like,
incredible. Yeah. So those are the people that I look up to, and I thought, wow, if they can do it, then maybe I possibly can. Yeah. But so then you auditioned for Mountain View.
Yeah, I just because that's where all my friends were going.
Okay.
So they were like, "There's a place called Mountain View," and I didn't know whether every actor or trained there. I had no idea about anything. I was so green, but they were going to this place called Mountain View. Okay, so I went and got an audition, And I got in, and none of my friends got in. So I then thankfully got a grant. This is back in the ancient times when you could get a grant. So I got a full grant for the whole thing, and a maintenance grant for the whole thing. So I left drama school after 3 years not owing anything.
Wow.
Which is like, I mean, how young people do it now, I don't know. But I was fortunate enough that I got a grant and so I came down when I was 18. And from then on, I knew exactly what I wanted, but I didn't have any frame of reference for anything before that. Mm-hmm. So once I came to London, I was like, okay, you train. And so then I worked really, really hard. Prior to that, when I was doing that first 2-year BTEC course, I was still kind of having fun. Mm-hmm. So it took me a little while to kind of go, this is something that you could spend a significant amount of your life doing and applying yourself to. Mm-hmm. And also a kind of knowledge that there was a kind of, things became clear that I thought, okay, this is what my mum is doing when she tells me those stories about her dreams, or this is what my grand's doing when she comes over and she tells her stories. Okay, that there's certain people can be storytellers. And I'm that. Okay, great. So once I knew that, and that's what my music is as well. That's what I like about writing music.
It made sense.
Yeah. So it made. I was very clear then that I could then, rather than having your energy kind of dissipate or using your energy trying to work out what it is that you are, I could just focus all of that energy on what it was I was doing. So yeah, I had a great time. Once I came down to London, I was like...
How was your experience in drama school?
It was cool. Like, everyone had no money. Even though I had a grant, I still was like, eating baked beans and bread, and just, that was it. And not telling my mum I didn't have any money, and she'd be like, I know you haven't got any money. But that aside, I'm 18 and I'm living in London, and I've got meeting new great friends who are also like me. Mm. It's like you talking about this place. It's like when you are with like-minded people, that kind of frees you. Yeah. Because it validates you in a way and kind of encourages you. Or even just simply as like, there's a competitive element. Whatever it is, it enables you to kind of grow. Yeah. And I definitely found that. There was a music block with every room had a piano. So I was like, this is heaven.
Exactly.
So I would, they would continually, mainly how my day ended is like the caretaker coming around, knocking on the piano door saying, you need to go home, we're locking up the building. And I'd be like, okay, fine. And I'd go home and then get up first thing in the morning and come back and do exactly the same thing. But you can do that when you've got, you must be the same, right?
Yeah.
You've got the energy when you're 18.
You're almost like a child again, you know?
You still are, I guess.
Yeah. And they allow you're in this place where you can play.
Yeah.
And hear all the tools.
Yeah.
Play, and you meet other people, mentors and people who are older than you, and it's so encouraging. Yeah, beautiful place to be. I wonder how it was for you though at that time, especially because I've spoken to different people, especially people of color. For them, going to drama school was a bit of a different experience. They've had some challenges, and how was that for you?
I was the only black male in my year, and there were 40 of us. However, I had a teacher who started, I think, somewhere in our first year. And she had been an actor, and she'd been with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She was black. She'd been with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She'd done a lot of stuff. She knew James Baldwin when he came over here to do the A Main Corner and all that kind of stuff. So thankfully, she was like, okay, baby, come. And actually, that book is dedicated to her because she became my mentor, basically. And she'd been through all of that. She was working, in the 80s and doing that stuff. And
that's the book. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, Claudette Williams is her name. She went, after I left Mount View, she went over to Central, and she's been at Central ever since. And she completely opened my mind about everything. Not only like about Shakespeare, I wasn't aware of Shakespeare before that. She's like, okay, this is Shakespeare. She told me about all of the writers that I needed to know. This is James Baldwin, this is Alice Walker, this is Toni Morrison, this is Langston Hughes, this is Zora Neale Hurston. She told me about all of those people, and she would give me books to read. Okay, you need to read that. You need to know what that is. You need to know who this person is.
Oh, that makes such a big difference in any young person's life, especially any creative.
Yeah.
And again, when you don't have a frame of reference, which a lot of migrants or children of migrants often find themselves in, because you don't have. So to have someone like that pour into you, and give you guidance, it's so.
Yeah, she's everything. She's everything that I do that I've got has come from her, 100%. Because she was like, okay, baby, come on. If we, you know, when you get to the national and the RSC, you need to have a voice. So let's go. Let's put in the work now. And she would, I'd go over to her house, and she'd make me, you know, do August Wilson speeches and things from his plays, and do it again. And she really, oh my gosh, it was. And the thing that I remember, I've said this before, but like the thing that I remember most was that I remember it in the moment, because I came to London and I wasn't like, you know how there's the star person in the school.
Yeah.
You know, on the football team or the star actor, you know, you're going to be an actor. And then when you get to London, the whole place is full of
people like that.
People like that, right? Who've been used to being like the star in their class, in their school. And I was like, I was kind of, there were very obvious people who were brilliant. And usually those people knew a lot about the world of Shakespeare, Pinter, and the National Theatre, and then in Judi Dench. They knew all of the stuff. I knew nothing about any of that. I was like, who? Where? Right. I don't know. I don't know any of it. So I always felt a bit like I was kind of catching up and kind of going, okay, well, all right, okay, and there's that. And they all seem to know it. Right. And they all seem to have parents who took them to Stratford-upon-Avon and the National Theatre and all that. So I started off from a perspective of being slightly behind in terms of just finding out what this world was. Everyone else seemed to know what it was. So again, Claudette was like, we didn't go and see stuff. I didn't have any money, but we would just read a lot, and she would give me stuff to read, and I remember her saying, when you get to the National Theatre, and I remember in that moment, she didn't say if you get there. She's like, when you get to the National Theatre. She didn't say it particularly pointedly, but I clocked it.
There was no question. It was just the thing that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that, again, when you get those things which sort of unlock you, or somehow on some level give you a sense of, okay, right, well, maybe... Because it's weird. You must have this where so much of what you're experiencing as a young person when you're creative is in your head. Mm-hmm. You're seeing things and thinking, oh, right. Or you're hearing music, or you're hearing stories, or imagining pictures and stuff. And then when you get those moments where someone outside of that is also validating that, it's really powerful. Or, as we mentioned earlier, or when they're switching it off.
I mean, I've had a lot of the opposite.
Right.
So
right.
But it's partly why I'm also doing this, to encourage young kids out there who are migrants to have mentors in many ways.
Yeah.
In many ways, even through that conversation, you're mentoring them.
Yeah.
Because you're showing them, first of all, that it's possible. Mm-hmm. But also they're seeing the human behind it all. And that you were also mentored.
Yeah, very much so.
In many ways, they should also look for that.
Yeah.
In whatever avenue they're pursuing.
Yeah.
And it just changes everything.
It does.
Someone believes in you.
Yes.
Validates you. And says, you can do this. No, you will do this when you do this. It's like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I should continue. I should be smarter. I should be.
Because it's funny, because sometimes in your head, you know all the answers really, because otherwise it wouldn't be there, whatever that thing is, in your heart as well as your head. But you're right, when someone else says it, or it's very, or doesn't say it, or says it negatively, it's very, very impactful on you. So holding on to that. I would say to people, hold on to your, whatever that thing was that made you want to do this in the first place, whether it's dancing or singing or storytelling or acting or directing or writing, whatever. Hold on to that, because that was there before you went to drama school, before you went to university. That was there when you were like a kid, and no one knew who you were. You didn't have a job. You weren't working for it. You didn't have an agent. That was just you and it. And then when you come to London and wherever your city is, then it's just the cast gets bigger. There are other people involved, but that thing is still exactly the same. And actually, if once all of that cast goes, which it probably will do at a certain point in some course of your life, that thing will still be there. So you need to protect that and be aware of that and value that, and find someone who is going to, hold on to it and take care of it enough until you meet that person who's going to say, actually, you can do this, or think about this. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, it's so great. Oh, so that was your experience. And then after drama school, what happens?
After drama school, you do that thing where you're supposed to get an agent. Again, that's a new thing. Okay, there's a thing that's called an agent, and that person gets you the work. Okay. Because people often ask me that. I don't know about you, where people kind of go, so how does it work then?
Yeah.
It's kind of, we know how it works, but actually if you don't know how it works, there's someone else and they give you these auditions or they get the auditions for you and then you go to the auditions and you hopefully get the job and then you give them 10% of the money. But so I got to that point, and again, I was fortunate. One of the third year productions, a guy who was choreographing the show that we were doing.
Do you remember which show it was?
It was called Runaways, which was this kind of wild sort of 70s show, a bit like a kind of Rent kind of show about young contemporary people. And this brilliant writer called Elizabeth Swados, who she worked with Peter Brook quite a lot. She made this thing in the 70s, and it was all young, kind of almost verbatim, real young people. And she did lots of workshops with them and then created this whole thing. Anyway, so we did this production. Guy who was choreographing it invited an agent along. It was his agent, and then said, oh, you should look at this guy, Giles. And I met up with her. And I got on well with her. And then I signed with her straight away and then started auditioning. And I thought, okay, well, now what?
Yeah.
Because up until now, it's like your training at drama school is very similar to school. Mm-hmm. You get up and go there every day. There's teachers, and then you kind of, you go home.
There's a structure.
There's a structure.
Yeah.
After that, I'm like, I have no idea what happens after this. And I thought, well, I'll give myself the rest of the summer to do these auditions. And if something happens, if I get one of them, great. And if not, then I'll go and get I'll get a job in Tesco's or whatever. I'll get a job. But I'll give myself a few months just to kind of do this thing. And then I didn't get any of the, I got lots of auditions, but none of the jobs. I didn't get any of them. And that kept happening. I do loads of auditions. Because at that point, you're just new. Yeah. You can go to theatre stuff. You can go to adverts and commercials. You can do whatever. So my agent was just putting up lots of things, wasn't getting any of them. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll go and get a job. And I went and got a job at the local theatre in Stevenage, where I grew up. And then literally the first week I was there, I landed a job. I'd had an audition and then I got it.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was called, there were two shows. It was a play at the Pleasance Theatre in North London. And it was The Demon Headmaster, which was like a TV show. And then they did a stage version of it.
So had you auditioned for it before going back, or?
I can't remember. I think so. Or maybe not. Maybe I had just started this job and then still auditioning at the same time, I think. The Demon Headmaster and The Animals of Farthing Wood, which was also a kid's book about these animals, and they kind of go off and have these adventures and stuff. So they were doing both of these plays at the same time. And so I got that. Yep. And then at the end of that job, that was over Christmas. And at the end of that job, I got an audition at the National Theatre. So then I went, and at the same time, I was auditioning for The Lion King, because The Lion King was starting, the first thing. So they're auditioning for this show, and I'm like, I love The Lion King. I have to be in this show. This is destiny. Like, I've got to be in this show. So I had the cast recording, and I was listening to it, and going over these songs, and it was for Simba. It was for the main adult Simba. So I'm 21. So I was like, I found it really hard to sing this song. It was too high, and I couldn't. So I would go back again week after week after week, and they'd say, okay, well, it's kind of, keep going, Giles. It's kind of almost there. You sing the first part good, but it's just those notes at the end. And so I was like, oh. So in the end, so that was 4 weeks worth of auditions. I'd go back. And in the end, I got pissed off, and I was like, why are these people making me do this song and I can't see it? They're putting me through agony. And I'm like, I so want to be in The Lion King, but it's like, why are they torturing me? So that same day of the fourth audition for The Lion King, I had The Lion King recall in the morning, and then after lunch there was this audition at the National Theatre. So I was so pissed off. With having to go and do this thing and like embarrassing myself in front of these Lion King people, that I was like, okay, the National Theatre, like I'm just going to do my thing, and if they don't like it, and I know they won't like it already, and so whatever, I'm just going to do it. So I was a little bit, I was giving myself such a hard time. But I went in, and you know how sometimes when, I don't know, it's something where you just, either you're a bit fed up or you're very tired sometimes, something that just takes the edge off your nerves or your
freedom,
or because we get so uptight when we go into auditions. We want to impress, and we've got to get it right. Hey, cousin, what is like? Does he like it? Does he like it? And anything that can kind of just take the edge off that, whether you're really tired or exhausted or just fed up or whatever, it's kind of good in a way, because that's where you should be in an audition. You should just go in and just be calm and just do it, as opposed to being slightly a few % too on edge.
Too eager, yeah.
And I guess that's what happened. So, because I got the job, I got the national job. So then I said, okay, Lion King.
I don't need it.
I was like, no, they don't want me anyway, but I'm going to, spare them the bother of having to tell me that I haven't got it. I was like, I'm going to the National Theatre.
Yeah. That must have been incredible, though. That must have been so validating for you to get that job at the National Theatre.
Yeah, it was.
And remember which show it was?
Yeah, it was for, get this, it was for a year's worth of shows. They were doing a rep season, like a repertory season where you do multiple plays over the course of a certain period of time. So they were doing, this was in January, and they were doing 5 plays over the course of 12 months. So I was auditioning to be in 2 of them. One was a Shakespeare, Troilus and Cressida, and the other was a musical, Candide, by Bernstein. And so I went and did it, auditioned, and got the job. And they had already started. They'd started by like a week or something. So I was the last person and the youngest person in the whole company. And they had these incredible actors. There were 50 actors, and they were doing 5 plays. So most people were in either 2 plays or 3. So you'd rehearse 1, and then once that was up and running, that show, the first show was up and running, you'd start rehearsals for the next one. So you were always working.
Oh, yeah.
Which was great, because it was just like drama school.
Yeah.
I was like, I can do that, because that's what we did at drama school. It was like we did 5 plays at the same time, or different subjects and stuff. So I was like, okay, yeah, cool. So I got the job and started straight away, and just that was the best. I would say it was like the best apprenticeship you could.
That must have been amazing.
It was, because you just had these people who'd been working for 30, 40, 50 years.
And again, so many mentors, yeah.
All of them.
People to look up to, and they're right there. You can touch
They're all
them.
right there, and you could just watch it for free. Mm-hmm. That's the way I looked at it. I was like, we had to be. It's like a school where you've got to be there all day. A drama school, you're there all day. Mm-hmm. So when I started working at the National, I was there all day. I didn't know that it's like, you're not in this scene. You don't need to be here. It's like you come in when it's yours. Right. I didn't know that, so I was just there the whole time, just watching. And because all of these people were doing amazing things, it's incredible to like. Sophie Okonedo was in it. She was the Cressida. She's gone on to be massive,
incredible.
She's an incredible actress. Simon Russell Beale was in it, and a couple of the older actors, Michael Bryan, he was in loads of productions at the National Theatre, but I think more than anyone else. I think he has a record. Dennis Quilley and Daniel Evans, some of the younger ones. Daniel Evans, who now runs the Royal Shakespeare Company, he was in that company playing Candide. So you had this amazing group of people. All the younger ones have kind of gone on to do things. Yeah, and there I was. So for me, it was like a complete dream come true.
Amazing. How did your mom react to it at the time?
She loved that, because at the end of that year, they added a couple of more plays on because it did so well. The season did so well. So they added The Ugly Duckling on as a Christmas show. Stiles and Drew, these composers, had written a musical version of The Ugly Duckling. So we did it as a Christmas show. And I auditioned for the villain in the piece is the cat who's going around trying to get the duckling. And that's what I wanted to do, because it was kind of fun. And you know how in The Lion King, like Scar is the best part. So I was like, I want to be the bad guy. I want to be like, that's the Ugly Duckling. That's the version of Scar in that thing. So I was like, he's great. He has great fun. But then they asked me to play The Ugly Duckling. So I was like, okay, this seems a bit... okay. But actually, it was amazing. It was amazing, obviously. But that's how green I was. It was like, you're sort of learning... I mean, everyone's learning in real time, but I really was. I was like, okay.
But there's freedom in that, though.
Yes.
You have, there's some... It's all about how you respond to it. But if you're responding to it with openness... and curiosity, that there's something so freeing about it, because you don't have these references and expectations. You're just kind of all right, let's go. And
that's right, because the only reason I got that audition for The Ugly Duckling was because the first show that I was in, Troilus and Cressida, the Shakespeare, I was cast as a spear carrier, Troilus's servant, basically, who comes on and says, he's waiting for you, my lord. And that's my line. But because I was there the whole time, there was this one character that they hadn't cast. So a couple of weeks in, the director says, they're saying to the Trevor Nunn who was directing, you haven't cast this part yet. Like, we need to, at the beginning of this other scene. So he said, Giles, can you just read this thing for the second, get on with this work they were doing. So I thought, okay. So that was when I realized that they hadn't cast this part yet. I thought, So then I thought, okay, let me see when they're rehearsing that scene again and just see if they want me to do it again, which they did. So it was like a week later, the same thing had happened. They hadn't cast because I was in the scene before it, so I was always there. And so again, the assistant director was like, Trevor, who's going to play this part? He said, oh, Giles, could you just read again? But I'd sort of thought, okay, maybe I should learn it before. So in the week, intervening week, I'd learnt it. We did the scene, and he said, oh, okay, that's great. So because I wasn't holding a bit of paper, he said, oh, well, when you just do it again, and just, I'm talking to Cressida and stuff, it's this kind of scene. So he gave me a tiny bit of context rather than direction. And yeah, so then I did it, and then a few days later, he was like, would you consider, relinquishing the role of Troilus' servant, playing this other part, who had it was like a scene, and he was Cressida's servant, and Cressida in the story, like all the men, Achilles, Ajax, Ulysses, they're all off having the Trojan War, and she's at home, basically, what's happening. She's at the palace, and she's bored out of her mind, and she has this thing with the scene with her servant, where she's like, what's going on in the war? And then the servant says, well, this happened. And they have this little gossip. And then Achilles is doing this, Ajax is doing this. So it's a nice little funny scene. So they asked me to play that. And so I sort of got bumped up. And then because of that, they could, at the end of the year when they did this other play, they sort of could see me as something that was capable of doing humor. And so again, it's like you were saying of I always think you just have to be, it's different from like ambition. You have to have ambition, but you also have to be just open and present to what's there and curious, like we started off saying, curiosity. So I was just curious.
You never know where it's gonna come from.
No.
What's gonna happen.
No. And that only happened because I was just fascinated, riveted watching these people work. That's the only reason I was there, because I was curious. Yeah. And then because of that, all this stuff happened. So, I think having been, as you were saying, like very green at the beginning, actually, now I can say that stood me in quite good stead, because I wasn't second guessing what I want to do. When I was at drama school, some people were already saying, oh, well, I don't want to do that, or I wouldn't want to do that I wouldn't want to do soaps or whatever. I don't even want to do movies. And I was like, well, I don't know, what's the difference?
Yeah.
So I think, and at the time I felt it was a bit like, a hindrance, whereas actually it was good because I was so open that I didn't really put any bids on anything. I was just like, okay, I'm here to sort of learn and take it all in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find it, I think just early on, it's kind of hard to dictate your career like that as an actor, I think, because you have to be open and see how the responds to you,
right,
to what you offer.
Right.
Now, of course, it can change over time, whatever, but
right,
because you never know. Maybe they love your Shakespeare, or they love singing, or they just love.
Right.
It depends.
Right.
So,
because I went into drama school thinking Denzel and Dustin Hoffman, and I liked Hopkins as well. But movies was the only frame of reference I had. Yeah. It just so happened that I then went to the National Theatre and was there for a year to begin with, and then 15 months in the end. My first initial encounter with it all was in the theatre. Yeah. So you just, you never know how it's going to work.
Yeah. No, truly, that sounds amazing. And then I guess from there, the rest is history. You've just gone on to just do so many shows at the National. I've seen you in Othello. I've seen you in Blues for the It was so good.
No, thanks. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Such a great show. But yeah, what in your time there, were there highlights? I would say, what were your highlights of your career
at the National, or just in general?
In general, or at the National first, and then in general.
That first season, because it was so unique. It's unique now. There were 50 actors. We did 5 plays. We were there every day. We were doing musicals, new plays, old plays, Shakespeare. We were working with brilliant directors. It was an absolute joy. And of those 50 actors, everyone was cool. Everyone was supportive. Everyone got on. I made friends that I still speak to now, 25 years later. It was like the perfect job. And half the company were black and half the company were white. I should have said that. So in Troilus and Cressida, of 50 actors, completely half and half.
Oh wow,
which is completely unheard of.
And at the time as well.
At the time, so in Troilus and Cressida, you've got it's the Trojan Wars. It's the Greeks and the Trojans. So the Trojans were black and the Greeks were white, which makes sense. I mean, it might sound like a bit of a kind of on-the-nose casting choice, but in a play which has 1 million characters, and the audience is going, whose side is that person on? So it makes perfect sense. But that meant that it was a completely equal company. So when I left, it was a massive awakening. Like, I'm the only one in this room. Right. Whereas prior to that, for 1.5 years when I started, it was completely like everywhere was completely mixed, half and half. Again, that was a joy to have that. It was like a perfect experience, really. And also, it's like when you do anything for the first time. It's like when you go to New York for the first time or whatever. It's like those you fall in love for the first time. It's like, well, you know, it's special in a different way. And it's a difficult question because I've been a lot at the National over quite a long period of time, so it's always kind of different. There's always something.
But you know, I can imagine the smile on your mother's face just seeing her son at the National and doing.
She came to one thing there. She came to the end to see that Ugly Duckling show. She was just starting to be unwell at the time, and she came along and she loved it. So the guy who ended up playing the cat, who's coming after me, she's like, afterwards in the bar, she went up to me, she's like, why were you trying to eat my son? But she was like, that was her kind of sense of humor, but she got to see that, so that was cool. I mean, also in a way, the flip side of all of that is we're so often with our families don't give a shit really about, like, not they don't give a shit, but it's like they don't really have the frame of reference that we have. They're proud of you, of course, but you know, maybe, you know, people kind of go, been on EastEnders yet? If I go back to Stevens, well, been on EastEnders yet? Whatever. But people have very few, it's a different frame of reference to kind of the stepping stones or the ladder of what our career is, that we would say, oh, this person's done that, or they've done that, or that's good, or that's a step up from that, or... Whereas families are like, okay, you know,
you're always Giles, my son.
You know, or that classic thing of going, you know, the other person, saying how good the other people are. So they come to the show and go, oh, she was great. Oh, that person was great. And you're like, hello. Oh, yeah, no, you're fine, whatever, you know. But I like that because it gives you a sense of perspective, I think. I mean...
Gives you grounded as well.
Yeah, it does. And it keeps the sort of vanity ego side of it in check, but it also kind of goes, don't take any of it for granted. Your audience is people who have massively varying understandings of what it is, and they're taking things in a different way. People who from the industry come to the show, they're able to say, okay, well, I saw this person play that part, and they're thinking all those kind of things. Whereas some young person who's never been to the theatre before or doesn't know the story of Romeo and Juliet, how it ends, they're taking things in a completely different way. And it's the same with the family. It's like, you know, if you're not good, they'll say, well, we weren't as good as the other thing. Or, you know, you know, and that's good to hear, I think, is useful, important actually.
And so after the National, what would you say that first time at the National, what would you say was the next highlight of your career personally?
I always kind of think that, I mean, it sounds a bit cheesy, but whatever it is I'm doing, I like to do things that are different than anything I've done before, if possible. That's what excites me about something. I've not done that before, or I've never done that, so I'll do that. And therefore that becomes like a highlight, often because you're doing things you haven't done before, which is cool. At the same time, the older I get, the more I don't know what you find, but experiences, usually I kind of judge them or weigh them on the people that I meet and the relationships that I form and the fun that I have with the people that I'm working with. The play can be whatever it is, or the film or whatever, and that, you know, that has its thing, but actually the thing which lasts is the connection that you have with people. I mean the fun that you can have.
Yeah, and it is what you experience as an actor.
Yeah.
Right? The audience sees the show, the film, but like what you experience as the actor is those relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
And the time spent together and...
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's true. I hadn't really thought of it in that way, because an audience is seeing like 2 hours worth of this thing, and you've done a month's worth of of rehearsals before that, you know, day in, day out, let alone then performing it night after night after night after night. So for me, that's kind of how I really gauge experiences, is like, or jobs, you know, projects, is like the connections that I had. So for that, Hamilton is definitely high up on that.
Get to Hamilton, which is the book he wrote, Hamilton and Me, about his experience, Aaron Burr, and performing, taking on the character. And it's truly a remarkable book for any, I would say, artist in general, but actor in particular, because he kind of documents his whole process, which is awesome. So how did that come about for you? I've read it, but tell the audience, how did Hamilton come about?
How did Hamilton come about?
Yeah.
I wasn't looking to do a musical. The short version is I wasn't looking to do a musical. Not looking to do a musical, but I like I say, I like to do different things.
Yeah.
So I'd done a few musicals. So I was like, okay, well, I don't need to do that for a while. So it'd been a few years since I'd done a musical, and my agent said, oh, there's this thing in New York called Hamilton, and I hadn't heard of it at that point, which is weird because at that point in like 2016 it had been on Broadway and was sort of at its peak of like sort of Broadway blockbusting. They're at the White House.
Yeah.
It's gone wild. But I wasn't really aware of it. But I knew that it was like a hip hop musical. So I was like, well, they're going to want someone. This is kind of going back to my Lion King thing. I'm always a bit like, oh, they're going to want, I'm not, yeah. But then I listened to it. I listened to the cast recording. I thought, oh, no, I know person. So I know who he is, and I know how he is. Very odd. It was like I know how he thinks. I know how he reacts to things, as if I was talking about like my best friend. So I thought, okay, no, this is something. And again, going back to what you're saying about being open, I was like, well, you have to be aware of when life kind of
pulls you,
in certain directions, or presents certain things in front of you. And the awareness of that was what I felt in that moment. I was like, okay, just listen to what this is. So then but I wasn't going to be in London when they were auditioning. So I was on tour with the Shakespeare's Globe at that point. So they were going to be auditioning here in London, let's say in sort of September, in the autumn, September, October, November. And I was going to be on tour then. But I was going to be in New York prior to that, like 6 months prior to that. It was an international tour. So my agent set up a meeting while I was going to be in New York. It's way before they were auditioning here. So I met them in New York, the sort of musical supervisor and the director, who's since a very good friend of mine, and didn't hear anything for 6 months while I was traveling around with the rest of this tour. And then when in that 6 months, they did the London auditions, and the finals of those London auditions was what they called me back for. So 6 months in between my first meeting.
You're like, it's not gonna happen, or
100%.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything from them. I was like, I kept saying to my agent, like, because you know what it's like.
Yeah.
You don't want to hold on to stuff and then be disappointed, but at the same time you can't let go of it because you might need to be ready to kind of jump back in. So you're in this limbo thing of like, what? So my agent was like, no, they said they'll see you at the finals and it's fine. The finals roll around in December and I go along and that was it really. It was a very quick thing. I went and met them, and Lin-Manuel was there, who'd written the show. I didn't meet him in New York, and that was it. They asked me to do it.
Yeah.
So there's only those 2 meetings that I had, but 6 months apart. So that's
incredible brain as well. I mean, his mind is just fantastic.
Lin, yeah.
Just putting that together, and you've been saying that I'm gonna write this show.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Like when I met them in New York, they sent me to see the show, and I didn't see Lin. Lin had just left like a week before we got there. We were there like in June, I think, and he just left a week or so before. But I saw the show, and I was like, how? I remember coming out at like the interval and like being in tears not because it was sad, but because I was like, how could someone put this together?
Yeah.
Like, how can an artist, the one thing I know, no matter what artistic discipline is, that we're never satisfied with what we do. Whether you're a painter, whether you're a composer, whatever, there's always stuff that you never quite have the time, you never have quite the resources. If you're a filmmaker, it's all that stuff.
Yeah.
And with Hamilton, I was like, that's perfect. Like, what must that be like for an artist to go, they achieved it?
And the journey, I can only imagine. I mean, he was already Lin-Manuel, but to say that I'm going to make this and it's going to be about this and I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
And to follow through like that. Yeah.
But that then also speaks to like, again, I think what you're talking about, which is he is the whole immigrant sentiment that runs through that whole play, and kind of being your own person and knowing what it is that you want to do, regardless of what the sort of wider world expects you to do, is really evident, I think, in Hamilton. Because if you look at that initial idea, the famous thing of when he goes to the White House, when he's just written one song, which is like My Shot or whatever it was, the opening, he writes the opening. and he does it at that poetry thing, and it's like,
and the whole cast as well. You look at them and you're like, because that's what I do. I watch people and I just put myself in their shoes. I just imagine them being like, okay, we're at the White House. And
no, I'm talking about when he's on his own.
Oh, that one.
He starts on his own. It was like in 2008 or something, and he says, "Yeah, I'm doing this show about about Alexander Hamilton, and it's hip hop." And they're all like, and you cut to the Obamas, and they're like, ha 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 ha. And he says, "I've got one song, a couple of songs written. I'm going to play one song," and he sings that opening song, and it's amazing. And like, to think that he's taken something which is not an easy sell at the best of times, but he's gone, that's what I want to do, and that's what I'm committed to right now, and I'm going to see this through. It was like an incredible thing to witness.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell the whole story because it's in the book.
It's in the book.
Yeah, but then fast forward to you're doing the show, you open, people are loving it, and then you get nominated. What goes through your mind that night when you do win the Olivier for Aaron Burr?
Thankfully, I hadn't been thinking about it too much.
Okay.
Because we were performing that day. We were performing at the opening of the Olivier Awards show, with the opening of our show, Alexander Hamilton. And that was the most nerve-wracking thing, because I had to start that song, and therefore I had to start the whole ceremony. And they'd said to me, okay, we're going to restage the opening of the show. Normally I would come out from the wings in the theatre, on the stage right wings, and then walk, and then I start the thing. And they said, okay, we're going to stage it so you could walk up from the audience. So when we staged it that way, and then when we came to do the show, the start of the Olivier Awards show itself, everyone else went backstage, because that's where they were going to come from. I got taken front of house. So I was like shitting myself, going like, wow, where is everyone? I don't have my friends with me. We would do our little huddle of a show, of an evening, and just like have our little prayer, and just like, there was none of that. They were having that, and I was like front of house somewhere. So I was terrified. And also, they hadn't said to me, they said, okay, someone's gonna do a speech, and then then our track start. In fact, you know how in the song starts, bum, 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 da, 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 and then I start singing. Well, I walk out before any of that happens. In the show itself, Burr walks out in silence, and then bum, 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 bum. So in the Olivier Awards, they said there's going to be a speech by someone, and then you walk up, and then you haven't got long, because I've got to get up these stairs whilst bum, 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 and then turn around and start singing. So it's a quick thing, so you can't be late or whatever. So I was like, okay, don't be late. But they didn't tell me there was like 3 or 4 speeches. So there was no one to tell me like, okay, go and wait now. Because I had to go and wait at the bottom of these stairs in front of the whole Royal Albert Hall, 6,000 people behind me. And I went out early because I didn't want to be late. So I'm standing there in my costume, the whole of the Albert Hall. Nothing has started in this whole, apart from these couple of speeches, and then these more speeches go on and on. So I'm standing there for 10 minutes, like getting ready to go because I don't want to be late. So the whole audience is like, okay, well, we know how the show's going to start. It was no surprise. So I was thinking about all that shit during the day. It was about getting that right, and like when my timing and all of that. So I wasn't thinking at all about awards at all. And then our category was, because Jam, who played Hamilton, was also nominated in that year, and our category was like the penultimate one. When we finished performing at the beginning of the show, I was just relieved that was over. So I was just like, okay, thank God. And I didn't mess up my lines, my voice didn't crack, like it was fine. I mean, I've seen it subsequently, and anyway, talk about artists not being satisfied.
I know.
But yeah, exactly. The sound was weird. Anyway, but I was relieved that it was all over. So I was just very relieved. And then when the nomination came up, then I was like, oh right, this thing as well. So thankfully, I wasn't particularly. I wasn't thinking about it. So then when it happened, it was just like a kind of a blur, really. Yeah, it was. I sort of wanted to make sure that I thanked the right people. Yeah. That was about it. That was the only thing that I'd thought about prior to it. I was like, if it does happen, just you need to thank people. Yeah. And that was basically all I said when I got up. Was like, thank you this person, thank you that person, thank you this person. And then you go backstage, and then there's a couple of interviews or whatever, and then the thing was over. So it was like, and then it was a party. So, and lots of other people in our company had won stuff. So it was actually, I'm glad it all happened that way, because I wasn't thinking about it, and therefore I couldn't get too anxious about it. And then when it did happen, the whole evening was over anyway. So it was like, it was cool. And so the main thing was being there with the company. Again, we were all there together. They'd staged it so that when we did that opening of the Olivier Awards, it featured the whole company. Normally the swings wouldn't take part in that of an evening. Swings are people who, performers who cover all of the parts in the show, but are not necessarily performing on stage. They'll be backstage. And then if someone's ill or someone's on holiday, they go on. They're like the saviors of the show most nights. Because someone's always ill, someone's always off. But on that day, we restaged that opening number so that the entire company were on. So we were gassed about that, because it was like, normally, there's like, I don't know, 12, 15 people around you. And now there was like 25. It was wicked. And we spent a couple of days sort of reorganizing that and restaging that. So that was what that day was about. It was like, we're all here doing this, and it's only going to happen once. It's not going to happen again. Yeah. The next day we went back to the normal show in the theatre. So it was
for all these actors also to share that stage, because that's so special.
Yeah. It was great. Yeah. It was so special. So that was what I really remember. Us just all being, just having a great time, And then you have seen it since. Again, just like seeing it all, seeing everyone is like, yeah.
But from people watching your career, I think it was such an incredible moment. Even you don't need the award, but again, validation that the world is watching and is really in awe of your work and your commitment to the craft. So I think it's good to remind ourselves sometimes, even though we don't as actors. But it was an amazing achievement.
I mean, thank you. It was I remember when I went to see it on Broadway that time when I auditioned in New York. And again, one of the other things I was moved about was something which seems quite commonplace now, but just seeing people of color on that stage doing what they were doing in those particular characters, and what they had to say. They weren't just sort of secondary characters, marginalized characters, the best friend or whatever. This was everyone on that stage. And that, even though I knew the show, I'd been listening to it, preparing for the audition, and obviously I hadn't seen anything, but seeing those performers on that stage was such a powerful thing. So I always tried to remember that. Some of our company hadn't had the fortune to be able to see it, but that's one of the strong things I took away. I was like, it's a powerful thing sitting in an audience and watching those people up, the black and brown people up there doing their shit, and not to forget that. So that even when you're, because we do the show for a year in town. Some people did it more than that. Even when you're tired, even if you're not particularly well, even if whatever, just to remember, actually, there's someone in that audience who, just for the fact that you're standing on this stage, is somehow adding to their experience of their life.
Especially for young people, just to see yourself up there. It makes you feel like, first of all, you belong. Yeah, because that's up there. But also there's the sounds, the type of music, like all of it. Yeah, it's so empowering. It's such a great job. Great job for people involved, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. So, and then from there, you decided to write your own show, Meaning of Song. Yeah. Which, of course, you can.
Which you were in.
Yeah. Well, there's bits of Hamilton in there you can see, but what made you decide to write the?
Okay. Interestingly. I heard about that and decided to write that story at the same time that Lynn was writing Hamilton, and they happen exactly the same period, the 1780s. When I came to Hamilton, I actually know some of these people because I've been reading about them and like studying them for my own thing. Ben Franklin and like stuff, intricacies of the war and all of that. It's exactly the same time period. But I'd heard about this story of these events that took place on this ship, the Zong, in the 1780s, and I wasn't aware of it at all. I hadn't heard of it before that. And I overheard a friend talking about this event, about this ship and what happened on this ship. So because I'm curious, like we've been saying, I was like, okay, well, I need to know what that is, and I've never heard of that. So I went and just, Googled it and just started looking at it. And the more I found out about the basic facts, the more I was like, okay, well, this is, again, something which sort of drew me to it. I couldn't quite articulate. But by that point in my career, I'm like, don't worry about articulating it. Just go with it. Be open to it. And start following down that, whatever that path is, and let it determine where it's going. And so I did. I started researching, and the more I did, the more it was just an amazing story, just in terms of the drama that's happening. And two, it was about British people, which I'm really interested in examining what goes on in our society, as opposed to we do a lot of American stuff in plays and musicals. And three, it was my own very personal. I mean, again, we talked at the beginning about like the question marks and filling in the blanks of where you've come from. And it spoke to that whole thing about my own journey, which goes back, prior to my life with my parents' lives. So all those things combined made me just sort of go with it. So I spoke to the National Theatre. I was like, I've heard about this story. It's an actual series of events. All the key figures in the story, historical figures, have sort of written their accounts, and they all have their memoirs or their life stories or whatever. And the events themselves have been quite well documented. So what I'd like to do is bring all of the existing material together and almost see if we can do a verbatim piece, or maybe I'll need to fill in the blanks writing it. So they were like, great, go and do that. So I started researching. It's based around a court case, basically, that happened in the 1780s. So there was a lot of that period that I didn't. It's amazing. The reason why it's such a fascinating period is you've got at the beginning of that decade, 1780s, you've got the beginning of the American Revolution, and the end of that decade, only 10 years, you've got the French Revolution. And right in the middle of it is this story about this massacre that took place on board this slave ship, and the trial that happened as a result of those events, and then how the immediate society and laws were affected by those events, and then how subsequently the world that we're living in now is still very much connected to what happened in that period. And in a way, it's almost like a great kind of metaphor explaining a lot about the world that we're living in now, rather than just being like a kind of like a history lesson or something.
I mean, that event changed the course of history in many ways, because it changed British history in many ways. And it's so amazing that it was all not just one person, but it was kind of, that whole thing was birthed by one person. Reading a story, and then finding a tribe of people. It's just the whole birth of the whole thing. It's just really incredible, and hats off to you for highlighting Lauda and his story, which I think in so many ways there's kind of a failure of education sometimes in our
massively
business. Where people can go through 12 years of education and not even know about these events that have really kind of shaped and changed of history.
I knew nothing about any of that. And that's, again, what I was feeling. Is like, I need to know what this is about, because it is directly linked to the life that we're living right now, and the questions that we're going through right now, and the problems that we're having, and we don't know about it. So it was a way of kind of going, let's talk about this and acknowledge it, and then we could, because it's not just a case of race either. It's to do with class, as everything else in this society, in this country, is to do with class. So it's like how that is all set up, how that works, how that functions, how connected we are to all of those kind of situations was really evident in this story. So it was quite a long period of development and workshopping it, and because it's a huge, as you can probably imagine from just listening, it's like it covers a huge amount of time. It deals with a court case which is happening in London. It also deals with stuff that's going on in the Americas, which is where the ship was going. It starts off on the west coast of Africa, where the ship began. So it's this huge, sprawling set of circumstances and people, which you then have to condense and to kind of hone into a piece of theatre, which is not going to be sort of overwhelming. So it took quite a while, but we had a lot of help with the National, and then Bristol Old Vic were really great and supportive. So, and then ultimately Barbican, where we ended up. So for
me, it's one of those shows that is a perfect show, because it's educational, it's entertaining, it's inspirational, it moves you. It has all these elements, and it's also fun.
That was the thing. People kind of hear, okay, well, this is slave ship and slavery, and people are just have such fixed ideas about what that is going to be, and I think that is part of what then prevents people from knowing. And I think in any situation which is potentially, or which is traumatic and difficult, human beings, the one thing that we will do is use humor to survive. because it's not like humor is in cracking jokes, but seeing things in a way which is humorous or diverting, or humor and laughter is alive. And if your life is kind of being threatened, the best way to sort of counter that in the immediate is through joy. And also the fact that I wanted to really highlight in this is like the people that I'm dealing with, the story is dealing with, come from a massive history which is rich and cultured and full of joy and full of life and full of invention and full of genius and full of strength and agricultural, philosophical achievement and all of those things, which we don't. Again, I found that actually no, I'm not interested in presenting a story about a group of people who are simply defined by the thing that we know them about. And someone saying, no, let's explore. These people had frailties and strengths and joy and humor and gossip and ambition, as much as anyone else that you could think about in literature. So that was part of the whole clothing people in the humanity that they would have had.
Yeah. And I thought it was beautiful to just giving a voice to these enslaved people and not just giving them a voice, but giving them a life, and you really get to see them as people, and see what they've left behind, what they've taken with them. No, it's just such a beautiful show, and hopefully it comes back.
Hopefully, it'd be good to see. I'd love to see someone do it somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Yeah, I mean, you've done so much, and I feel like we'll keep talking for hours and hours. What would you say? What were your favorite roles? I would say over your career. Like 2-3 roles that you would say these were my favorite roles, and then what's a role that maybe you're like, maybe I shouldn't have taken that on?
That's a good one to start with, actually. What should I have taken on? What shouldn't I have? Okay, that's a harder one, so maybe I'll think of that one. Favorite one, I just did a show last year called Passing Strange.
Oh, I saw that.
Oh, cool.
Oh my goodness.
At the Young Vic. And
beautiful show. Do you want to tell them a bit more about the show?
It was a show written by a guy. It's very similar start to me. Like he's African American, called Stu. Wanted to be a musician. He grows up in the 70s and 80s, and he's from a sort of good middle class background in America, and wants to be a musician, and then kind of struggles a bit at home, so leaves home and comes to Europe to kind of find his fame and fortune and become the artist that he's supposed to be. So it's kind of about his journey of going away, moving away from home to sort of find what it is, and he sort of goes through the ups and downs of that, but then also in doing that deals with the home that he's kind of left behind. He's raised by his mother, and how and he sort of, part of his going is to try to get away from her, but then he also realizes actually that she's the home. So it's a beautiful piece that he's written, and he's written the music for it and the book. So anyway, we did it at the Young Vic, and it's only got a small cast of like 7 or 8 of us, I think. And it's almost like a gig theatre. Some people said it's kind of like a gig, like he plays guitar. The main character that I played, Stu, is a guitarist, is a songwriter. So I could do that. I could. My mum had sent me to drum lessons as well when I was a kid for a little bit, and I was able to use that in the show as well. So all of the things which my mum had kind of given me, I was able to use in that role. So that's why it's special, really. That's one. Burr would be another one, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there's a role. I just wanted to go back quickly to that show. There's a line in that show where you say, or your character says something along the lines of, when you realize that all the decisions you've made were taken by a teenage boy.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that looks so deep.
Yeah.
And that relationship between the parent and the child was so powerful, and seeing him become the adult at the end of the show as well.
Yeah.
When he started out, he's like just this young dreamer.
He's a teenager, yeah.
And then he becomes an adult, and it was just that journey.
Yeah.
Again, wonderful.
And again, like you say, some young artists that would come along and see it, because the play is about a young artist and finding himself and sort of defining his own definition of what it is that he is. And young artists that would come, lots of people at drama school training would come and go, wow, that inspired me to kind of really follow my dream and follow what it is my instincts are. So it was beautiful to do, and we were supposed to take it to Boston in a couple of weeks. Actually, I was supposed to go in 2 weeks' time to Boston, and that it fell through for various reasons. But so maybe it'll happen again. There's plans for it to happen again. But
so there's Burr. What's the third one?
Probably just off the top of my head, the character that I played in Blues from the Alabama Sky, which is called Guy. Guy was again Passing Strange was written and performed first in America, but not performed here. We did the first production, and the first American production was like in the mid-noughties, so it's got a while before the European. And the same was for Blues from the Alabama Sky. That was, I think, performed in the late 90s in America, but it hadn't been performed here. And so we did it at the National Theatre, and I played this. It's set in the 30s in the Harlem Renaissance, about this young showgirl and her kind of ups and downs. She's trying to find love, and she has this friend called Guy, who's a costume designer, this kind of flamboyant gay costume designer who designs costumes at the Cotton Club in the Harlem Renaissance. And Lynette Linton, who directed the play, she called me and said, I want you to play this part. And I loved the part, but that's not the kind of part that I would necessarily be approached for. So I was like, yes, great. And I wanted to work with her. And it was the most brilliant experience because, I don't know, there was something quite freeing about it. One, brilliantly written. Two, brilliant company, great director who allowed the space to invent and play. Yeah, something just... And also I was rehearsing. I was about to start rehearsals for Othello at the same time. So they were both in the same theatre, and Othello was the production which was coming after Blues. So we rehearsed all of Blues, and then once we started performing Blues, in the evening I was rehearsing Othello in the day, which is wild now thinking about it. But again, going back to that very first time I was at the National, when we were in rep, that's kind of what we did.
Yeah.
So my brain was very used to that kind of thing anyway, not necessarily playing these two massive parts.
I know, Othello the lead, and then a Guy as well.
But in a way, it was quite good because Guy was so opposite to what Othello was in terms of energy that they kind of balanced each other in a way. So doing Othello in the day and then going to perform Blues at night was it was a kind of freeing thing, which is great.
Yeah, you had so much fun on that stage.
I loved it.
It was just it was so freeing, just seeing the looks you would get.
Yeah, I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, and you got to it was just a different side of you. It was so beautiful.
And he had the thing at the core about that character is he had dreams. Mm-hmm. The whole thing was about dreams.
Very childlike, which I love. Yeah. Very aspirational.
Yeah. And he wanted to go somewhere, and he wanted to get to Europe, and he designed costumes. So he knew Josephine Baker in the play. Mm-hmm. He knew Josephine Baker, who was now a big star in Paris, and she was going to send for him. So throughout the whole play, his thing is like, no, Josephine's going to send for me. She's going to send for me. I know she is. She's written me a letter. She's going to send for me. And at the end of the play, she does, and off he goes. So it's about like having the courage of, again, what we're talking about. It's like, if you've got something, even if, and in that play, and it's interesting what you were saying before about how many times you've been told, like, no. In the play, it's full of that.
Yeah.
They're all going, oh, Guy. Yeah, sure. They think he's even made her up.
Right.
It's like, you didn't even know her. Behind his back, they're like, you didn't even know her. Like, there's no way she's going to send for him, and why would she? And then she does, and he goes, and it's like, yeah, you have to just find out what it is that's calling to you, hold on to that.
Yeah.
And look after that and kind of go for it. And it might take a bit of time, but if you do, it will pay off on some level. Even if that thing doesn't happen, what you will receive in being committed to it and focused to it will enrich you in some way.
That journey. So what's the one role that you're like, maybe I shouldn't have done it? Even though you're a very nice guy, I feel like you're not gonna wanna.
There's one show which. Okay, I might get in trouble for this. Well, okay, I did a show called The Book of Mormon.
Okay.
Which is not necessarily the role, but the piece.
Has Adiga Iboy. It's hilarious though. I mean, I understand.
People love that show. And I loved, again, the company. In fact, I saw one of the actresses from that show the other night at the National, and we hadn't seen each other since that show, and we had such fun because we had a lot of fun on that show. The piece itself and certain of the ways in which specifically Africa was portrayed in that. Which, and like, if you ever put this up as like, you just take this clip and put this up as a thing, as your clip, you're like, I'm gonna come and find you.
Yeah, we're not gonna cut that one out.
Yeah. But no, because I do feel this. It's like the way in which they wanted to portray Africa specifically in a specific way so that the characters could have a journey with that perception. But sometimes I felt like we weren't, as a production, clear enough about that it's from the perspective of these two characters, and they go on this whole journey, and then actually by the end of it they've learned a lesson about what the place that they're in. Sometimes I felt a little bit like we're not as rigorous with that bit of the journey that we should. So there's a lot of laughing at Africa. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't know how I feel about that. But
no, I agree with you. The thing that's, because the same writers of South Park, you know,
who are brilliant.
They make fun of everyone,
right?
Yeah, which is the thing that gives you pause, because they really make fun of everyone. But it is when they came, see, it's interesting, because when they came and they explained what the show was and what they wanted to do, that made perfect sense. And I was like, yes, this is great. It kind of, it really shows the sort of Western view of Africa, and it really highlights that. And we go on a journey, and it's great. But as a production, I was like, we need to be really rigorous about what they said and what they wanted their story to be. And sometimes I was a bit like, well, I'm not sure whether they're quite doing that. Yeah. So that's the closest I'd get. I loved doing it because, again, the company that we had were brilliant, and I made friends that I've got. But that's the closest. You made me, you asked me that question. No, it's fair. It's my fault. I'll take the.
So I wouldn't say that's something I regret doing.
Yeah, you don't regret it, but it's just.
But that's the one thing that I'd say. Okay, I would have liked to have been. That's for me probably more than anything, to have been more rigorous about what that thing was.
No, but it's fair. So ever since you started in the acting world, everything has changed for very, it's really changed, especially in terms of representation and everything like that. How have you seen it changed from your perspective, and what would you like to see, I guess, differently moving forward? Kind of the deep questions now.
Yeah, it has changed a lot in terms of we're able to now talk much more about the conditions that we have to work in. It's a difficult profession because you are using your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts. It's not like you're going to go and sit in an office and you're working with numbers and stuff. You are working with your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts. That's tricky because you have to take care of that, and sometimes we're in situations where the lines are blurred with what's acceptable to use and draw on, what's not. So now we're able to have much more honest and open and frank conversations about all of that stuff, which I think is really good. So it's not just a case, when I started, it was like, actors, you basically do what you're told, and you kind of you're grateful for the job, and if you don't want to do it, someone else will do it, so you just kind of put up with it. To a certain extent it was that. Whereas now it's much more like, okay, well, actors have a voice, which I think is really good and allows for a healthier industry and a healthier working environment. But then that goes across the board, like things have opened up. So if you think something like Hamilton, one of the great things about Hamilton, I think, is that you don't have Bridgerton without Hamilton, I don't think. Yes, you don't have, Six was another massive musical which is still on without Hamilton. The idea that you can re-look at how you cast shows, TV shows, movies, specifically TV shows really, but movies is kind of heading that way. And certainly theatre has all shifted, which I think is good. Theatre's always going to be a moving thing, a shifting, growing, changing thing, depending on what's going on in society, what styles are, what the fashion is, what people want to hear about, reflective of what's going on in society. So it's always going to change, and I think it's important that we change with it.
Yeah,
you've got to grow. There's no point kind of going, this is how we do things. So I think it's always, but then it becomes like, it's got to be a work in progress, and you've got to keep asking the question of like, where are we? What can we do better? What needs to change? What's outdated? How can we, because for me personally, if you start from the perspective of like, I want to go and see a movie or a play, piece of theatre which reflects the world that I'm living in now, So when I walk down my high street, these are the people that I see. I want to see art that reflects that in all its forms. I don't want to just see art about one group of people or one person. If you want that, then you sort of have to get up every day and say, am I doing that? Is what I'm creating fulfilling that, holding that mirror up? So I think it's a continual thing, don't you? It's like you have to just...
Yeah, it's there, and you have to adapt. That's what you do as an artist, and you have to find a way to make it make sense. But that's why I think artists are needed, to kind of reflect what's happening in society. And also question what's happening in society.
Yeah.
And get people to think about how things are being run or how things are being done, and the ways in which they can be done better.
Yeah.
So I think the job of the artist is very important, even though a lot of people don't.
Yeah, and the scary thing is that right now, it's times like now where all the important art really comes. It's the times when it's really difficult and when there's lots of social unrest at the time, and when the kind of plates of what's going on in society is shifting, the power structure shifting. If the power structure is like under threat, then screws get tightened elsewhere. And then when screws get tightened elsewhere, people can't feed their kids. And then when that happens, people take to the street. So when there's unrest, no matter what society, and we're quite good here at kind of keeping people kind of chill. But in other countries, it's like when it gets like this, but dramatic stuff happens.
Yeah.
And it's usually down to the writers and the artists, the people who can see mashed potato like it's a camel or whatever, who see things like who like you, like looking out the window and just seeing stuff. It's down to people whose talent it might be to kind of observe and see
beyond what is. Yeah.
Then that's when the important art happens, I think. And as scary as it is, because bad stuff is happening in the world, difficult stuff is happening, and we have to kind of live through that. The useful thing is then, okay, how do I contribute productively to that? Yeah. And so I agree, like art is important for that.
What's next? Because you've written plays, you've written songs, you've written music. What's next for Giles? What if you could come up with what's the next thing that you would like to do? You would like to see, what's the next thing? If you could have, I don't know, if you could just decide right now, what is one thing that you'd like to work on specifically and that you'd like to see come to fruition?
I always like to do something I've not done before. So that's always like be on the lookout for something that's new and challenging that I might, have to overcome and deal with. Because that's how you grow, I think. Yeah. But then also, I want to get a company together. We're talking about getting a company together, which will be a sort of multi-discipline situation where we can create things for theatre, things for screen, live performance, etc. Writers, similar to the situation that you've kind of got here, really, that you were talking about earlier. Yeah. It's like bring artists together and encourage people to kind of come up with some really interesting stuff, because part of what I've been feeling in the last couple of years is that actually, if you're a creator of color here, or increasingly like that is certainly includes like because I don't think you can really talk about race in this country without talking about class. And I was saying earlier on, I was able to get a full grant to go to drama school. Them days is gone.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how as a young person you kind of do it now. And yet we need, if we could have a really healthy industry, to be encouraging people, to be finding young people who don't have a lot of money, whose parents don't have a lot of money, class-wise, white working class, black working class, brown working class, doesn't matter what it is, but people who in our society who don't have access to all of this shiny, glittery stuff that we have in London, making sure that they're able to kind of have access to it as well. So for me, that's really important to be in a gatekeeping situation. Gatekeeping is always a kind of weird word, but actually, but someone who's an enabler.
Yeah, giving people
that I think is really important. And in our industry, there's a pocket full of people, as in most industries. There's only 2 or 3 people who've kind of got most of the power and the say-so about what gets done. And I think, when I started, we didn't have a lot of directors of colour. Performers, okay, fine. Directors, writers of colour, okay. Now we've kind of moved down the road quite a bit in that direction. But in terms of people running buildings, people running production companies, people running broadcasters, that is where I think a lot of the work has to be done. So, I'm always having conversations about people who are on the kind of business side of things and the investor side of things, to kind of go, how can I be in a situation where I can enable lots of other people to do really amazing things, which aren't beholden to, yes, but we only really want to hear about those kind of stories because XYZ. No. You're an artist, and what story do you want to tell? Don't worry about whether it's, what I think about it. What is it that you want to do? I think it's really important to have that, because when you have these big institutions which do have subsidies, and therefore they're kind of beholden to what the kind of government says, this sort of tacit, silent thing about what gets done and what doesn't get done. You also need the independence that kind of go, no, you do what you want to do. Because the thing that struck me is, like, all my favorite movies usually about you hear the kind of the making of those movies, and they're usually some filmmakers gone, I shot this movie around Hollywood, no one wanted it, no one wanted it, and then some, Star Wars, George Lucas, and he says, I took it around all of Hollywood, they didn't want it, go to Fox, Alan Ladd Jr. says, okay, I don't know what this is, it's weird, but I believe in you. Right, it's a space thing, I don't know, but I think I'm going to invest in you rather than this story. Smart man.
Yeah.
And I think you need that in order to have a really healthy industry. Yes, you need someone who's like, okay, well, this is what the kind of status quo is, and this is what the dominant narrative is. You also then need independence to kind of go, no, because those are the people that, something like Lin-Manuel, it's like,
yeah, you can't,
write me a show which is going to make $1 billion. Yeah. That ain't Hamilton.
Right.
That's a weird thing. Then write me the show that's going to make me $1 million. No, that's the show that's going to do it, and it's because he believes in it, and someone is smart enough to go, write that. He goes to the public theatre and says, go.
It's believing in those people who wouldn't necessarily be believed in. And these ideas. We need that. We need that because I think people often go by formulas, especially in so they look at what's made money before, they look at all these formulas, and it has to fit in. If it doesn't fit in, they're like, it's really interesting, so you always have to be, and it's funny because the one that's out of the box is the one that tends to break through the idea. Exactly.
Always. So there's always what comes in the wake of. So after Hamilton, you see all these shows where it's like, you can see that someone has gone, get something like Hamilton. Make something like Hamilton. You go, well, no, it's kind of, that's been done. You need to find the new thing, not the formula. Or, if you listen to music, in the 80s, now I can go, oh my God, some record company said, make something like Thriller. Just record something, get some drums like Thriller, get some vocals like Thriller. And it's like, well, but it's just a copy of a copy of a copy then. What really makes a difference, as you say, is the one which is kind of out of the box and original, and someone's been true and not tried to be a formula. They've gone, no, what is it that I want to do? What's the piece of work? How can I be true to that? And if you can get it, which is why you need to kind of cling on to that gold or that diamond or whatever that is of your instinct, your talent. Because if you can keep it as clean as possible, that's what people see. If you're trying to create something and recreate something and do a formula,
they get turned off as well. I especially because I watch so many things and I go to see lots of shows. Like when you start seeing things that are, they're just trying to copy this. Like sometimes you get turned off. Unless it's done a bit differently, even within. Because it's like Shakespeare, it's all of the story, but it's the way in which the story is being told.
Right.
So that can even be different.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to know, because you've done so much, what was it like? What was it like to hear that you were going to be a member of the Order of the British Empire? Like, how does that come about? And what goes through your mind, when you get that call?
Yeah, that's it. They just call you, I think, or my agent called, so I guess they contacted your agent. And what went through my mind, I can't remember, to be honest. I mean, I was like shocked again because it's like I have no frame of reference for that. So I was like, okay. And then you have to, I think it's like a sort of formal, like you get a letter to say this is what the government would like to do. And then therefore you can then accept it. Whatever. And again, for me, it was lots of things, but it was certainly one of the foremost things was like most things, just thinking about my mum and thinking about, you know, her getting up. You know, I remember once she told us one year that like 1 February she got up and worked every day, like on her days off. She would, like lots of single parents, you'd work on your day off and you get your agency work and stuff, you know, in the snow. And like as a kid, you're just like, oh, mum's going to work or whatever. But now as an adult, you kind of go, wow, I can't even get my head around that. Like, she was a nurse, she worked at the hospital, so it's like, but at the same time, she gave us as much, you know, bringing it all back around to kind of immigrants. She gave us a huge amount, and she wasn't, you know, my mum passed away 18 years ago, so she saw some of what I did, but not a huge amount. She didn't see Hamilton or anything like that. So for me, since her passing, which is why I talked about like passing strains of like being, the older you get, the more your tools are kind of honed if you work at them. And so the more I appreciate what they are, and the more, in a way, I don't know how conscious it is, but for something like Passing Strange, you being able to use all the things that my mum gave me is a way of sort of celebrating and honouring her as well, and being with her. Yeah. So part of that, getting that call was I saw it totally from that perspective of
it was really about her.
Yeah.
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 It was really for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like I say, I'm just curious about stuff, and that curiosity has never really changed. So that's really drives what I want to do. If my agent, you know, my agent might say, oh, this has come up, you should do this. And I'm like, well, if I'm not really drawn to the challenge of it, or it doesn't grab me, then it's not necessarily something I'd want to do. And sometimes my agents will be like, well, why you do it? But I like to do stuff which is gonna, you know, which interests me and is gonna challenge me. So that's never changed, really. Those things are important, but what's much more important to me is the stuff that you can really gauge. It's really hard to gauge when you get a letter and you say, oh, the government would like you to give you this thing. Okay, for your services to theatre, okay. In a way, it's partly like I'm just kind of doing what I'm just on this journey of just trying to do things which interest me. And if it didn't, or if I wasn't able to do it, I'd go and do something else. But part of it is also like, I want to make a contribution. And also the flip side of it is like, with something like Hamilton, we all said like, okay, we've got this platform now. We've all been given this opportunity, the company that is, to be in this place where people are looking at us and people are interested in what we're doing. And what can we do with that? How can we then carry the sort of story on a bit further, or encourage other people to, you know, so but all that's really important. And I feel like with the MBE, it's kind of like, okay, similar with Hamilton, okay, if I'm going to do this, the one proviso is that I try and do as much with it as possible. Right. Yeah. If it's got to be of use. If you do anything, it's got to be of use to someone and make some kind of positive contribution.
Which is a testament of your character and probably the way you were raised as well. I think from having had the privilege of spending time with you, even in the rehearsal room, I can say that you're just an incredible human being with such great humanity. And I remember just going to rehearsals in the morning. Sometimes you'd be playing and you'd just be playing the piano, and I would just sit there and just listen. And it was just the simple things, you know. And you taking the time to actually greet people and look them in the eyes. It's just the little things. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't know why else we're here, really. I mean, as human beings, but also definitely as artists, it's like, well, what else are we doing? If it's not about this kind of connection that we're having, then I don't know. I mean, yeah, you know, the shiny stuff is great. Yeah. You can get to do things or be invited to things. That's cool. But really, I think if you know, I started off as my mum and my 3 sisters, and that's it. We didn't have anything. We didn't have any money. We didn't have anything. We didn't have all the other things that kids had. To a certain extent, it's like, I certainly think the things that you get are just a kind of bonus. Yeah. The flash things and all of that, and they're nice and it's great, but it's actually, there's going to be a point where those things aren't really there. The only thing that's going to be there is like the relationship that you have with someone, or if someone certainly during Passing Strange, for some reason, it was quite a lot of young people. So young people would stop me in the street or in the at a theatre or whatever, and say that they were training, or that partly the nature, I think, of what that show was about young artists, that they were inspired by what we were doing in that production. That, to me, that's the thing which really makes you go, okay, cool. Okay, that's a positive. More than even awards. Awards are great, but if you can, because I know what it's like to be that 18-year-old kid going, oh shit, here I am in London. What is my life going to be?
Yeah.
Am I kidding myself about all this, or
doubt?
And then it's like, your parents or your family, you don't want to let them down because you're on this mad dream thing that you want to do, and but there's something in you that's like making you do it, and you're full of all this kind of uncertainty. If you can have that moment where someone says, okay, has given you a bit more fuel to kind of keep going, then that's huge, I think. Yeah, that's a win. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Giles. I feel like we can stay here for hours and keep on talking. Yeah. But I know you have to go, and also I think we've covered so much. So thank you very much for taking the time. Everyone should definitely check out the book. I think it's incredible.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good seeing you as always, and good talking with you. Yeah. It's cool. It's a good thing.